Uh, Catherine, good afternoon and welcome to the first WSS Methodology Seminar for 2025. I am Pushpal Mukhopadhyay. I'm the Methodology Program Chair for the Washington Statistical Society. As you know, all our past and upcoming seminars are available from our website. If you have any recommendations for future seminars, please contact Catherine or me. Now, recently, the Census Bureau integrated 7 independently designed ongoing surveys into one survey, the Annual Integrated Economic Survey, or AIES. Thanks to Janie, they have agreed to give 2 WSS seminars to introduce the new integrated survey. In today's presentation, Stefan Kaputa and Colt Viehdorfer will talk about designing an economy-wide survey to produce accurate estimates at varying levels, the Annual Integrated Economic Survey. The second seminar is tentatively scheduled on May 1 at noon. Laura Bechtel and Jeannie Thompson will talk about statistical editing and imputation for AIES. Now, Stefan Kaputa earned his undergraduate and master's degree in statistics from Virginia Tech. After graduating in 2006, he began his career at the U.S. Census Bureau in the construction programs methodology branch, and then worked as a member of the complex survey methods and analysis group in the economic statistical methods division. While at the Bureau, he has had the opportunity to work on many aspects of the survey lifecycle, but is most interested in estimation methods, including the use of Bayesian models and third-party data sources. He currently leads the newly created composite methods staff, which specializes in model-based solutions for traditional survey problems. Stefan lives in Alexandria, Virginia, and enjoys a variety of outdoor activities, including sailing, skiing, backpacking, and fly fishing. And he is also an avid marathon runner. And Colt Viehdorfer is a mathematical statistician at the U.S. Census Bureau, where he is currently focused on developing and implementing the methodology for the new Annual Integrated Economic Survey. Colt has a BS in mathematics from the Allegheny College and a Master of Applied Statistics degree from Pennsylvania State University. He previously worked on construction and manufacturing surveys in the Economic Directorate. Outside of work, Colt enjoys spending time with his wife and 2 kids, watching Penn State sports, playing the piano, being outdoors, and golfing. A little bit away, we will have question and answer after the presentation. You all are muted. Please feel free to send your questions using the chat. After the presentation, we will unmute you. And now back to Colt and Stefan.
Thank you very much for the introduction and for having us here today. I will go ahead and share my screen and we can get started. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about a few topics, but the main focus for today's talk is variance estimation for this new annual integrated economic survey being conducted by the Census Bureau. Any opinions and conclusions expressed herein are mine. They do not reflect the views of the U.S. Census Bureau, and this product was reviewed for disclosure. I'd first like to acknowledge other members on this replication research team. And just to note that Jenny was a co-lead on this group, and it does build on some prior work that was led by Justin Smith. So today, I'm going to introduce the AIES sample design and estimation procedures. And then we'll get into the variance estimation by presenting the candidate variance estimation procedures with the 3 listed here. We have our approximate sampling formula variance, anti-TA, bootstrap, and a double half bootstrap method. And then we will look at our case study and the resultant recommendation from that study. So some preliminaries. The Annual Integrated Economic Survey. It's an economy-wide survey conducted by the U.S. Census Bureau. We mailed the survey out in March of 2024. Collection of that data has since concluded, and we're now in the process of analyzing the data, editing, imputing, all of that fun stuff. And as was previously mentioned, this survey replaces 7 annual surveys that we conducted in the past. And this new survey is a multi-purpose cross-sector program. So the publication requirements that we had for this survey is to produce national industry estimates of 4 key items. That's payroll, first quarter payroll, employment, and receipts, plus a variety of sector-specific items. The CV target at these national level industry estimates is 2%, and we go all the way down to the NAICS 6 level for these national industry estimates. We also want to produce sub-national estimates, industry by some geography, for the 4 key items that I already mentioned. The CV target for those estimates is 15%, and we designed the survey to aggregate the industry level for these geographic estimates down to the NAICS 3. So some definitions. Sector is an area of the economy in which businesses share the same or related business activity, product, or service. Industry is just a group of companies that are related based on their primary business activities or service. Industrial classification, industry code that gets assigned to an individual business. Typically, that's based on the business's largest source of revenue. And I've already mentioned NAICS, but it's the North American Industry Classification System. And the more detail you have and the more digits, you have more criteria, and you start to split those businesses into more detailed levels. So here's a NAICS example from the retail trade sector. The NAICS 3 general merchandise stores, you can see that gets more detailed down at the 4-digit and then all the way down to the 6-digit level. The 6-digit level is the industry level that we will publish our national estimates. And the industry level for the subnational estimates that we designed for was at the 3-digit. So a few more definitions. An establishment is a single business location. You could think of a bookstore on the corner, a manufacturing plant, a warehouse, etc. A company is any formal business entity for profit, which may be a corporation, a partnership, association, or individual proprietorship. So in this example here, we have a multi-unit company, a subsidiary of Global Dynamics, Inc. They have multiple hardware stores, they have a warehouse, and they have a manufacturing plant. A single unit company is a one establishment business location. So the one establishment, one company, that's what we call a single unit. So on our sampling frame, we have a mix of these. Global Dynamics, Inc. is, again, in multiple sectors. It has activity in a variety of sectors in the economy and multiple establishments. Meanwhile, the shop is a single location establishment. And we have a variety of information on our sampling frame related to these companies and the associated establishments. This is fictional data, but the sampling unit is the company. And then we have the sampling unit components within that company. Here's some classification information, geographic information, and some quantitative variables from our frame. Payroll is used as the measure of size in the sample design, and receipts was used for analysis purposes. And again, just to highlight, Global Dynamics, Inc. is a multi-unit, multi-sector, and multi-state company, while the shop is a single unit, it's in one sector, and operates in a single state. For the AIES sample design, the sampling unit is the company. We stratified for subnational estimates within a NAICS 3 allocation was based on national and subnational estimates within a NAICS 3, and the original allocations could be modified to achieve the national NAICS 6 CV targets that I previously outlined. The inclusion probability for an individual company accounts for the company's contribution to either the national or subnational estimates. We ended up taking whichever of the two was larger for that company's final inclusion probability. So for basic stratification of the companies, if they operated in one or more sector or NAICS 4, so these would be multi-units that have activity in multiple NAICS 4s, we took those in the sample with a weight of 1 and called them complexity certainties. The remaining companies were our non-certainty portion, and we broke those into sector-specific frames, and the broad strata were the NAICS 3 level. The geographic substrata were either a state or a balance of region, or in some cases we had a multi-state stratum within a NAICS 3 for businesses that had establishments operating in more than one state. So altogether, we had 27 geographic substrata per industry. And this map illustrates when we were doing the sampling what the direct use states were versus the balance of region. The darker colors are the direct use states. So our minimum number of sampled non-certainty units that we wanted to be allocated within each of these strata was 5. So for the direct use states, NAICS 3 by Minnesota, in this case, we would want to have at least 5 units coming directly from Minnesota within that NAICS 3. Meanwhile, the balance of region stratum, the minimum number of 5, could come from any of the states within that balance of region. Now, I will note when we designed this, we were planning on using small area estimation to get estimates for some of these other states, and that's what Stefan will follow up my talk with in his presentation. So the conditions for the sample design, we had a fixed sample size, unequal probability sampling, and a stratified sample. We wanted a mixture of companies within those strata for each NAICS 4, 5, and 6. And we wanted a good mix of companies from each state for those balance of region strata. And we also wanted a variety of company sizes. So we decided to use sequential random sampling, Chromy's method, and the sort for that method also gave us additional implicit stratification within each of those strata, and we were able to get that desired mix of companies and geographies and company sizes by doing that. So high entropy versus low entropy sampling. This will set up some of the variance talk. High entropy designs have large variability between samples. On the other side, low entropy designs have little variability between the majority of the samples. The high entropy design, you can get the joint inclusion probabilities from the first order inclusion probabilities. That is not the case for a low entropy design. Some examples of a high entropy design: simple random sampling, Pareto sampling, and Poisson sampling. Examples of a low entropy design would be systematic PPS, and the one we chose, sequential random or Chromy. The AIES estimation, we produce domain estimates. Again, we're sampling at the NAICS 3 by geo, but producing estimates down to NAICS 6, and those balance of region estimates, we are producing state level estimates within those. It's the Horvitz-Thompson estimator, where your Y in this case is the contribution to a particular domain K from the company. It could be a state, NAICS 6, et cetera, whatever portion of that company is contributing to that particular domain. And we just weight them up using the inverse of the inclusion probabilities. So some candidate variance estimators. We have the design-based estimator, and here's the Horvitz-Thompson formula for that. The known inclusion probability for company I in stratum H is denoted pi sub HI, and the formula includes the joint inclusion probabilities of company I and L in stratum H. And again, we have the low entropy design. Some challenges with this estimator I'll list out some methodological challenges, but the main focus on this slide that I'd like to talk about is from the implementation perspective. As I was trying to figure out how to do this in a production setting, there were some particular challenges for implementation. One, you have to store all of these joint probabilities for all the pairs in the database. And there are numerous obstacles whenever your y's in a particular domain are equal to 0. So thought, okay, maybe we could find a replication method that will work at least as well as the design-based variance estimator. So I'm going to present a couple methods here today, and they're bootstrap resampling methods. The sample size is the same size as the original sample and the same design weights as the original sample. Resampling is different from the original sampling scheme and incorporates a finite population correction and approximates the design-based variance estimator for unequal probability samples. In the literature, these designs were evaluated on high entropy sampling designs, and with AIES, we have a low entropy design, and so that was something that we wanted to evaluate. The first, called the ATB by us, it's a sampling procedure with mixed methods. So uses without replacement using the parent sampling method, and then the following piece uses a with replacement design. It equals an approximation to the SYG variance estimator, but you do have to select one of 3 possible approximations of the joint probabilities as a function of the first order inclusion probability. The second design we looked at was the double half bootstrap method, and this is also a mixed sampling procedure. The first being without replacement, Poisson sample, and the second is a with replacement for the second piece. This also equals an approximation to the SYG variance estimator. However, there's one approximation of the joint probability, so there's no choosing from possible methods. So a very simplified picture of how the ATB procedure works within one stratum. So you have your original sample S, and you determine your n prime, and it's simply the floor of the sum of the original inclusion probabilities, or the floor of the sum of the original inclusion probabilities plus 1. So you always have an integer value, and those are randomly assigned. Then you start bootstrapping. So you first select a Chromy sample of size n prime without replacement. The remainder of S minus SA is simply n minus n prime, and you select a 1-to-1 sample for that remaining piece, and that is with replacement. So now you take S sub A and your S sub B, sum them together, and you have your original sample size and your bootstrap sample, and you just keep doing that. The doubled half bootstrap simplified procedure, again, have your original sample, and you start bootstrapping by selecting a Poisson sample without replacement. That sample that you get is your n prime, and again, your remaining sample you will select without replacement using a simple random sample of size n minus n prime divided by 2. Just a note here that if n minus n prime is odd, there's a simple adjustment. It's just n minus n prime minus 1 over 2, and then you select 1 unit at the end to get back to your original sample size. So in this case, once you select your S sub B, you multiply that by 2. That's where you get the doubled half bootstrap. Add that to your S sub A, and that's your final bootstrap sample, and keep doing that over and over again. The variance estimator takes all those replicate bootstrap estimates, and in our case, which I think is on a slide upcoming, we found convergence at 400 replicates, so that's what we're using, and the formula is here. So our case study. We looked at 7 NAICS 3 industries using frame data. All of these sampling strata had a frame size of less than 3,000, so we could obtain exact joint inclusion probabilities, and we weren't having to estimate those joint probabilities. All industries contain 2 or more NAICS 6 categories. And our target domain estimates in this study were NAICS 3 by direct use state, 23 per NAICS 3, Horvitz-Thompson estimates. And the reason we looked at the NAICS 3 by direct use state is because we didn't have these domain estimates where you get variability in your sampling sizes at the NAICS 3 or within those balance of state estimates. So we selected 5,000 independent Chromy samples per industry using the AIES design strata, allocations, and inclusion probabilities, constructed an empirical variance, and then took 1,000 of those 5,000 samples and looked at the 3 possible variance estimators. As noted here, we did have to collapse strata for the SYG. And as I previously mentioned, we used 400 bootstrap replicates per sample. We looked at 2 evaluation statistics. I'm not going to cover the confidence interval coverage rate in these slides, but it is in our paper that we've been putting together. And some of the results that we got. So the gray line is the empirical variance that we got from those 5,000 replicates. And in many cases, the ATB and DHB methods gave very similar results. However, there are some outliers in the using the ATB method. And that can be seen here, some very, very large standard errors. Removing those and taking out the ATB, you can get a better look at the DHB method versus our design-based estimator. And the design-based estimator has very, underestimates the variance in a lot of cases. And that can be seen here, where the DHB method actually gives us a better approximation. So what is the conclusion? One of the revelations we had was there was severe undercoverage with the SYG estimator. And we actually got better performance using the replication methods. So that was really exciting because we were just hoping that we could at least get the same results as the SYG estimator with these replication methods, so we could use that in a production setting, but we actually got better results. And the ATB, as I noted before, had some inconsistent performance in some of the domains. So a recommendation for AIES is to use the double half bootstrap for our production estimates and also in future sample selection programs for the AIES. Another advantage is it's easier to calculate variances for ratios, and at some point we could easily use this method to get imputation variance to account for non-respondents, which we are not currently proposing to do in year 1. It would just be sampling variance. Some references from today's talk. And any questions, suggestions, or comments? I thank everyone for their time. I think that's right at about 20 minutes, and I can turn it over to Stefan.
All right. Let me share my screen. I'm assuming you all can hear me.
Yep, we hear you.
And I'm assuming you can see my screen.
Yep, looks good.
Excellent. All right, well, I'm Stefan Kaputa, and thank you for the introduction earlier. And Colt, thank you for reading our disclosure statement there. So I will not have to reiterate that. First of all, small area research took a team. These abbreviations mean nothing to you all, but ESMD is our Economic Statistical Methods Division, and me, Stefan, and Yang, Danny, reside there. Our management division, Julian's, helped out a lot of keeping us on track. Our Center for Statistical Research and Methodology, we've had a ton of help from them, Jerry, Serge, Ryan, and Gary. And Ginny has sort of become an honorary member recently, so I added her to this slide. I never put up an agenda, but I'm going to go through a lot here, so I thought I'd give you a preview. First, I'm going to talk a ton about small area estimation methodology. So if you know nothing about small area estimation, this is going to be great for you. I want to talk about the covariate analysis we did and some special scenarios that we're adapting to. Then we're going to do a quick empirical evaluation, and then I'm going to finish with an example. All right, first, you heard Colt talk about our economy-wide survey that replaces multiple independently designed annual surveys. And like he said, it's designed to produce national level detailed industry estimates and limited industry by state estimates. But what about the more detailed estimates? Well, AIES is designed to produce those 6-digit national level estimates and 3-digit NAICS for select state estimates for annual payroll, first quarter payroll, employment, and receipts. Now I'm going to tell a story through a series of definitions here. So let's define a direct domain estimate as a domain that uses only domain-specific information. You can think of these as typically design-based estimates using survey weights given a sample design. For example, the Horvitz-Thompson estimator. And we consider a domain large if the direct estimate is of adequate precision. And as Colt said, for the NAICS 3 by state estimates, the target coefficient of variation used in the sample design was around 15%. We consider a domain small if the direct estimate is not of adequate precision. This can occur for small states that were not directly designed into the survey. It can actually occur for any of the 50 states if we decide to publish at a more detailed level. And NDC, don't want to forget them. And why does this occur? This occurs due to are constraints that prevent us from drawing large sample sizes from small domains. Example, burden. Small establishments have enough to deal with already. We don't want to be sending them a long form every year. And budget. The other side of the coin, we could just do a census every year, but budget does not allow that. So now let's define indirect domain estimates. These borrow strength from related areas or time periods to increase the effective sample size. Think of these as model-based estimates. So let's introduce the Fay-Harriott model now. It's an area-level model that blends a direct survey estimate with an indirect model-based estimate. This is an optimal estimator that reduces the mean squared error. And a linking model defines the relationship between the domain estimate and auxiliary information or covariates. In a nutshell, we need auxiliary information that is a strong predictor of the survey outcome. Now to walk through some notation. First, we have our sampling model or direct survey estimate. Our y hat is equal to some truth plus an error, and that error is centered around 0 with a known variance. In this case, that is our direct survey variance. I should note D is domain here. And these models are fit at an industry estimation level, either at a NAICS 3 or NAICS 4. And I've just omitted that subscript just to make things a little easier to read. Now let's define our linking model or indirect survey estimate. This probably looks very familiar. It's a regression model. You can think of it that way. Our y is equal to some set of covariates and their error term. An error term centered around 0 with some model variance. So visually, what does this look like? Ignore the x-axis for now. Let's just look at the y-axis. So these are real survey estimates. That's why the scale is omitted for a single industry. These are the log of the direct survey estimates with their confidence intervals. And, you notice some are of adequate precision, you could say. Those are probably the larger estimates on the top right. And the smaller estimates on the bottom, they have pretty large confidence intervals because maybe they're not of adequate precision. And if we add in the log covariate, we can fit a regression line. This is just a simple linear regression line, and this is our indirect survey estimate or linking model. You think of a estimate from this as just a prediction from that regression that would fall on that line. So back to more notation, we have our linear or mixed model or the Fay-Harriott model, where our direct survey estimate is equal to our regression model plus those two errors. And you can solve this, and we can end up with our empirical best linear unbiased prediction estimator, our EBLUB estimator. And if you notice, the Fay-Harriott estimator is just a weighted average between our direct estimate and our indirect estimate or model-based estimate, given this shrinkage factor. And the shrinkage factor is created from sort of a weight, it's a weighted average between the two sources of error, the direct survey estimate or the model from the model. And I can think of the model-based error is fixed. And if we just imagine as the sampling rate increases, we get near sort of like a census where there is no sampling variance. And that would create this shrinkage factor to be 1, which would result in the Fay-Harriott estimate being equal to the direct survey estimate. On the flip side of that, as the sampling rate or decreases towards 0, the variance is going to increase to infinity, causing this quantity to go to 0, which would switch the Fay-Harriott to be mostly created from the indirect or model-based estimator. So what does this look like just visually when we put it all together? We have our survey estimates, our regression or indirect survey estimates here. And in a blink of an eye, you can see some Fay-Harriott estimates overlaid. And if you paid attention, you would notice that the error bounds were decreased, but the estimates are now sort of shrunk towards our indirect survey estimate. You notice the ones at the far right and top are not being adjusted at all. It's probably because the direct survey variance was low enough to not rely on the model-based estimates. So now let's introduce sort of the Bayes version of that and why we're using it. Transformations are easier. We can back transform the log posterior distribution. It's very straightforward. We can add additivity requirements or constraints. We can, for example, we can adjust our state posterior estimate or posterior distributions to known regional totals, which is a requirement. And we can also add informative prior information. And we've been doing this research in R with a new package called Reject FH that draws exact samples from a Fay-Harriott posterior using a rejection sampler. If you would like more information about this, I will direct you to talk to Serge and CSRM. I can give you his contact information. But I'm not going to go through this notation in detail, but this is the sort of the Bayesian notation of the model that I just described. And we're going to use this for the rest of the presentation when you see any results. But a quick sort of visual example. I'm a visual learner, so just sort of a visual aid of what that Bayesian model is doing. Here we have, let's look at 2 distributions first. One, the direct estimate, which is in red, a red dashed line, and then the model-based estimate, which is the dotted blue line. And you'll see the posterior distribution of the Fay-Harriott estimator is in green. And you can see it's kind of leaning towards the model-based estimate with the shrinkage factor of 0.2. And this is because the direct survey estimate has a pretty large variance compared to the model-based estimate. So the precision's a little better for the model-based estimate. On the flip side, with a shrinkage factor of 0.86, we can rely on the Fay-Harriott estimator can rely on the direct survey estimate more when the model based estimate has large variance. Okay, now to confuse everybody a bit, to introduce one last variation of our model. And this is quite recent work, and we think it has a lot of promise. We're going to call it the non-certainty model. Recall from our sample design, a portion of the estimate, potentially a large portion of the estimate, is tabulated from companies sampled with probability 1, or certainty. In our case, there's no sampling variance associated with them. So we can break up our direct survey estimate into two parts, a certainty part and a non-certainty estimate. And we thought, why not just try modeling the non-certainty portion of our estimate and treat the certainty part as a known constant, since there is no sampling variance associated with it. So just to go back to that notation again, our Fay-Harriott model changes a little bit. We're just on the left side of the equation, we're just modeling the non-certainty portion of the direct survey estimate. And our covariates are going to change to just sort of represent the non-certainty portion of the estimate. It's kind of confusing now. I'm going to talk more about it and go through an example that will hopefully clear it up. And you'll see the estimator down at the bottom. It's very similar. After we're done with the Fay-Harriott portion, we sort of just add back in our certainty part of the tabulation to get our final Fay-Harriott estimates. So again, this model treats the certainty portion of an estimate as a known constant. We're only modeling the non-certainty portion of the estimate. But like I said, we create these special covariates, and they are a lot more difficult to create. They're just not a state by NAICS combination anymore. We have to add in an additional layer of stratification, and that is certainty or non-certainty. And we can do this two ways. We can link sort of this company level covariate data to our AIES frame to create these special non-certainty tabulations, or we can independently create our non-certainty tabulations using our AIES stratification rules. And I'm going to talk more about this on the next few slides. But again, we now have three different general models. We have our combined model, which is we're modeling the certainty and non-certainty combined, which is sort of the final estimate. I guess you could say the state by industry. Number two is the non-certainty only model with covariates created from covariates tabulated from linked data. So we can link that data, company establishment level data, to our AIES frame, which has a cert, non-cert designation already defined, and just tab it up to create these special covariates. But third scenario, the non-certainty only model with covariates independently tabbed using AIES stratification rules occurs when we cannot link this establishment or company level data to our frame. In that case, an example of this would be maybe 5-year-old data that we can't link just because of the IDs don't match anymore, or company structures have changed, or the error rate for linking that data is too high. But we do, hopefully you'll see, we have the variables used in AIES to stratify. So we can independently run it through the stratification process to designate an company cert or non-cert, and again, create these special tabs. Okay, now let's talk about actual economic data and what we have available to use as covariates. Again, recall AIES wants to produce state level estimates, NAICS 3 by NAICS 4, for 4 core items: annual payroll, first quarter payroll, employment, and receipts. Luckily, we have this data product at the Census Bureau called the County Business Pattern, CBP. It's an annual series that provides subnational economic data. Sources are from the Business Register, Report of Organization Survey, and a lot of other data sources, including administrative records. And we can get 3 of the core items: annual payroll, first quarter payroll, and employment. What's great about this data set is we can link it to our AIES frame extremely easily and create sort of prior year covariates for 3 of the core items. We also have our economic census. It's conducted every 5 years, and it collects the 4th additional core item that CBP does not cover. This is the scenario where the tabbed data, the tabbed covariates, independently created tabbed covariates is important. If our census data is 3 years older than our current AIES frame, that linking error might be pretty large, and we're not comfortable with that. So we can run this old economic census data through the AIES sample design process and create these non-cert special cert and non-cert tabs. And I will say sourcing good covariates is a large part of this research. So we're going to walk through what our actual data look like for a single undisclosed sector. Here's just a bunch of econ census state estimates. You notice they're quite log normal. So we're going to just take the log of them, and you can just assume everything from here on out is on this transform scale. Here's the correlation structure for our 4 core items. They're highly correlated. You can actually see each of the industries in there. It's probably 50 state estimates for each of those kind of lines that are kind of hidden in there when the distribution, when the scatter plot sort of separates a bit. But these are very strong correlations. But what about the predictive power of our variables? So we're going to remove the sample design from this and treat our economic census state estimates as response. And then we're going to see how well our prior year or prior census covariates can actually predict our sort of simulated response. And we're going to do this through brute force method with 15 possible regression models and I'm just going to walk through 2 of these variables. So here's 15 possible regression models. We got simple linear regressions with 1 covariate. We got 2 covariates, 3 covariates, and the last one, the kitchen sink model. And we're going to fit these regression models, all 15, at the industry estimation level for this sector. So there's about 10 of those for each of the response variables, pay, quarter 1, and receipt. And we're going to evaluate diagnostics. We're going to look at box plots of adjusted R-squared, residual standard error, and parameter significance. So first, adjusted R-squared. Obviously we want this to be close to 1. And if you look at all these, I mean, they're all extremely high, but the prior year quarter 1 payroll value is doing pretty good at estimating or explaining the variation in the Q1 or the current quarter 1 payroll estimates. You notice adding additional covariates isn't really increasing the adjusted R-squared. Same story for the residual error. We want this to be low. The simple linear regression with prior year quarter 1 payroll is doing a pretty good job. And you probably guess the number of non-significant parameters increases as we add covariates. It's really not explaining any more variation. So in this case, if we put all this together, a simple linking model is just using a prior year estimate of quarter 1 payroll. Receipts kind of tells a slightly different story. We call this as prior census receipts. So it's a 5-year-old value of receipts. And if we notice, let's see if I can point here. If you look at adding the additional covariate, which is payroll, annual payroll, it does increase the adjusted R-squared from the single covariate model. And most of the parameters are still, most of all the parameters are significant when you look at across the industries. So, a very simple linking model is just single covariate prior year data for 3 of the variables, and then a 2 covariate model for receipts. And this is the worst case scenario when our receipts variable is 5 years older because we're using 1 year economic census as our response, and then the prior economic census is our predictor. So let's look at an empirical evaluation. So we took the current AIES production sample. We simulated full response using census and CBP data across all sectors. So please do not draw inference about the population. We produced Fay-Harriott estimates for 3 variables using the suggested covariates and their 3 different general models: the combined, the non-certainty tabbed covariates, and the non-certainty linked covariates. And we looked at some diagnostics. Since we simulated our response using census data, we actually have a true value here. So we're going to look at relative bias, mean squared error, and the shrinkage of the standard deviation in CV. So I got a little plot for you. We have 3 estimates we're evaluating this on: pay quarter 1, employment, and receipts. We have our direct estimates. The relative bias and mean squared error will be in gray. And then we have our single covariate models for 2 of the variables, and then our double covariate or 2 covariate model for receipts. And for the Fay-Harriott models, we have our combined, we have our tabbed covariate, the non-certainty scenario, and then we have our linked covariates, which is again another non-certainty scenario. You notice we don't have the linked version for receipts because the prior census data was 5 years old, so we just did a tab version of that. So let's fill in some results here. The good news is any of the Fay-Harriott models reduced the relative bias and the mean squared error. The 2 non-certainty models, the tabbed and linked models, shrunk the standard deviation a lot more than the combined Fay-Harriott model. And I think if you kind of look, there's a little bit, the standard deviation CVs were shrunk a little bit more for the linked model compared to the tabbed model. In summary, our Fay-Harriott models reduce the relative bias and mean squared error. The Fay-Harriott non-certainty models have the largest reduction in standard deviation and CV. The Fay-Harriott linked non-certainty model performs slightly better than the tabbed non-certainty model. We recommend using the linked covariate model when we can, and you'll see why here. Quick example, uses the current production sample that we use for our evaluation. And we're going to produce Fay-Harriott estimates using the non-certainty model only. The prior year covariates will be linked to get their sort of special non-cert tabs, but the prior census one will be tabbed up independently. We'll designate it cert or non-cert independently. Again, we're doing that because it's 5 years old. And we're just going to quickly look at some CVs and log estimates for a single sector and 2 variables. So direct CVs are on the x-axis, and our Bayesian Fay-Harriott CVs are on the y-axis. I've removed 3 observations because their direct CV was very large. And if you notice in this sector, we're reducing the CV, and we're doing a pretty good job, it looks like. I mean, majority of the estimates down by the origin are probably of great, decent quality. But that doesn't mean there can't be some significant gains made by using the Fay-Harriott procedure. And here's just comparing the log direct estimate to the log Bayesian estimate. Granted, log scale, hard to see what's really happening, but if you notice, the estimates track pretty well. Some of the smaller estimates near the origin here probably deserve a little further investigation of why we're modifying them so much. And we can look at receipts as well. Similar story. We're reducing the CVs here. We are actually increasing the CVs in a couple scenarios here. We believe it's due to poor model fit, and it would definitely warrant further investigation, sort of just along the same lines as some of the estimates that were changing greatly on the plot to the right. So I'll end it there. We are doing a lot more current work and research. We're expanding our evaluation to more detailed NAICS levels. We're currently treating direct survey variances as known. We're actively discussing if we should be modeling or smoothing those. We can add a lot of stability to small domain variances. It is challenging the first year because we don't know exactly what these variances look like. And we're working with our disclosure staff to address that risk. And as always, we need to implement this in production sooner than later. And here's my contact info. And thank you for listening.
All right. Thank you so much, Stephen and Colt. Thank you for participating in this seminar series. The floor is open for question. You can put your question either in the chat or just raise your hand. Phil, you need to unmute.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad to finally have a WS seminar on an AIES, which I've asked for years, and I finally got one. And so contrary to, was it Colt? Well, I've heard this plenty of times before, but we haven't heard this plenty of times before because this is, to my knowledge, the first WSS seminar on it. Anyway, I have a relatively easy question. Is there any calibration of the weights involved in AIES, either before or after non-response adjustment?
No.
No. We were originally looking at a ratio estimator, which I guess does some calibration. But I think due to multiple issues, it was abandoned, and we're just using a Horvitz-Thompson estimator now.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, one of the main reasons we didn't implement that was because of all of the status changes that were happening within a company, and that ratio estimator wasn't as effective as we were originally thinking it would be.
I hope it would be. Okay. Right. And you have, what, 4 variables you're looking at. So you could conceivably, well, then you'd have to calibrate on whatever you're stratifying on too. And it could work, it might not work, but it makes variance estimation a lot difficult. And of course it would,
it
would make a replication much easier than linearization, which is another reason why people like replication.
Yes.
Yeah. So you're sticking with, well, I guess you're sticking with Chromy samples because you've already drawn Chromy sample, but the justification for using a Chromy sampling is that you can estimate the variance easily, but you can't. I mean, you can in principle do it, but you can't in practice. As you pointed out, calculating the joint selection probabilities is at low entropy or high entropy. I never remember which is which. It's really hard to do.
It's the low entropy design. It's hard to calculate the joint inclusion probabilities, especially if the stratum frame size is larger than 3,000 cases. You're estimating it. Yeah.
That's why I like systematic PPS, because, well, I can't do joint selection probabilities. That's okay. I'll pretend I can and go from there. But it was interesting to see that the replication move worked out better. I have to read the paper to figure out exactly what these replication methods are, although I sort of like the half bootstrap idea off the top of my head without being able to analyze it.
Yeah, we were very pleased with the results.
Thanks a lot for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for the comments.
I have a question for each of you. So Colt, I'm wondering for the variance estimation method, because you're now in production, you'll have more data to work with. Are there plans to reevaluate the variance estimation method or sticking with the selective method going forward?
We're sticking with the selective method going forward. At this point in time, I mean, we're starting to put out estimates sometime this summer. So not a lot of time to reverse course at this point.
The train has left the station.
No, it makes sense. And especially when you're standing up a new survey, you need to make decisions and go with it. Do you think in the future this is something that would be evaluated? Not that it needs to be. I'm just curious what the plan is for the program.
Certainly. Yeah, once we have actual results and stuff, we can certainly reevaluate.
Thanks. And then Stefan, I was wondering, so the linked model had seemed to have better performance, but one challenge of using linking is if you aren't able to link, then we'd run into issues. And I'm wondering, has there been problems with being able to link with the information? Is there like a percentage that you think you are able to link, or any that you won't be able to link?
It's an extremely high linking percentage. Luckily, I mean, both the CBP and the AIES survey originate from our business register. So there's a common ID that they all share. It's really great. It says they should link up perfectly, but like Colt said there can be like status changes, company structure can change, which does cause some linking error, but for the prior year, we're pretty comfortable with that error.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. All right, Jenny, I believe you should be able to unmute.
Oh,
Maybe not.
Jenny, you are on mute now.
Says she's still muted.
Now I'm giving up.
We can hear you.
We can hear
I
you
have
now.
a couple
We
quick
can hear you.
things. Because first of all, I wanted to just congratulate Stefan and Colt in particular on these great presentations. Normally, I would say facetiously in my head, I couldn't have done it better myself. In this case, I particularly think Colt did do a better job than my presentation for the FCSM. And he even caught a typo or two that were on my original slides that were pretty important. I did want to follow up though with you, Catherine, on your comment about changing the variance estimation method. We don't see any real point in this. First of all, this fits seamlessly into our processing system. Everybody was very excited about the idea of a replication method that works. And from a methodology perspective, we don't have any calibration, but we do have a lot of imputation. And it will be much easier to put in our parking lot the idea of incorporating some of the imputation adjustments into our variance estimates with a replication method. Much, much harder with other methods. We certainly couldn't do it with the Sen Yates-Grundy easily or correctly. So we were pretty excited. And as a comment for Phil, the first paper, we give you a reference, a JASA reference. It started off really well, and then it sapped all of us of our will to live, but it is readable. The second paper is much easier to follow, the doubled half bootstrap.
Thanks, Jenny. I appreciate I'm not pushing for any reevaluation. I'm just curious, since I've recently been part of a new producing a new program recently, and there's a lot of thoughts on like what needs to be reevaluated, what decisions do we just stick with? And so that's helpful to have the background. We are at 4 o'clock, so I think we'll wrap it up, but want to thank both of the speakers again. Thank you so much. It was very informative and really interesting. They both shared their contact information during the presentation, so feel free to reach out to them if there are further questions. And thank you so much for attending this WSS seminar.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Stefan and Cole.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.